Okay, so good evening everyone, and those who were here last week, welcome. Those who weren't here last week, welcome as well. Is there anyone at all who's absolutely brand new? Okay, a couple. And the rest is full of veterans. Have we got any 10-year veterans of Monday nights? A couple. Okay. Isn't it? Okay, so this is awesome. Okay, so where we started last week was talking about the value of compassion in our lives, as opposed to not having compassion, and we ended up with the first step out of the 11 steps in the meditation we're gradually working our way through, which is looking at equanimity. I was saying that equanimity was the foundation or the basis for us to develop love and compassion, and also to develop the altruistic attitude of develop ourselves in order to be able to better benefit others or work for others. And with this equanimity meditation, what we're trying to do is equalise the way that we view other people. Because at the moment we have a sense of self, we have a sense of others, so there's a separation or some form of duality, if you like, in terms of myself and others. And based on this concrete, of an incorrect view of ourselves, we have attachment and aversion arising within our minds. And based on that, there are some people whom we're attracted. We want them because they think they'll make us happy or give us happiness. And there are other people we have aversion to, or we have some resistance to or discomfort with, who we feel are going to disturb, not make us happy, or somehow or other we see them unpleasant. And so we have this view of them as what arises in our mind, this thought, we don't particularly want to be near this person. Then we've got other people who we're indifferent to. We don't really have feelings about a sense of attachment to them, in other words, wanting to be near them, or a sense of aversion or dislike, not wanting to be too close to them. So what we did was to investigate, okay, if we look at our own, say someone in our life who's a friend, someone we've got aversion to, someone who's neutral, how did that judgment within our mind arise? What were the circumstances that caused us to label one person a friend, another person enemy, another person as just a stranger and neutral? And what we can see, if we look closely, it's usually based on one or two incidences, or maybe a couple more, and we then label them. But we also know from our past experience with our interactions, relationships with people, our relationships have often gone through, initially we might have disliked the person, and somehow or other we got to know them better and we sort of turned around and liked them. And of course somewhere before that they're a stranger. Or on the other hand, of course, it might have been someone we were absolutely head over heels in love with, and that eventually turned sour in terms of relationship breakdown. So we can see the relationships change, and those things change based on our own projections on the person, and of course how they react to us as well. So what we're trying to do is lessen our judging people or evaluating people as friend or stranger based on our own preconceptions or our own projections. So we're trying to loosen that type of thinking up and make it more even. Now that then leads us into how we might view sentient beings and in a more positive light, and how we can recognise that all sentient beings, all living beings, that have been kind to us in different ways. And so if we can generate within our mind a sense of the recognition of kindness of others, then the next thing is we'll have a mind that naturally or automatically arises sort of wishing to repay that kindness. And we know from our experience that if a friend or someone does something, goes out of their way to help us, we have this automatic sense of obligation, sort of, think, sometime in the future when you need help, I'll be on the lookout to sort of try and help you or return the favour that you gave me. So that tends to arise fairly automatically or spontaneously for us. So when there are two types of kindness that we're going to look at. The first one, this one's probably the more challenging one for us in some respect, is that we recognise or see all living beings as having been our mother, so not just this life but in previous lives. So obviously with that there's an assumption, or it's predicated on the idea that we've had previous lives, and when we've had previous lives, of course, we've had a mother, someone who's looked after us. Now, in terms of the idea of previous lives, it's difficult for us to see. I mean, there are people who have got really strong concentration, who can trace back through their memories in this lifetime and keep tracing back. So like when you're, say, 20 years old, or 10 years old, or 5 years old, or 1 year old, or a few days old, or something like that. I know in my case I can't remember being born. I've got no recollection of that at all. My earliest recollection is somewhere between when I was between 1 year old and 18 months old. Because I used to live in a tent in my first year of my life. I guess a bit unusual, but that's how it was. And my father went to another property, worked for a person. We lived in a house there. And my recollection is this place being on the veranda and seeing orange trees. And I said that while my mother was still alive. I said this, and my mother said, "Oh, this was for this such and such place." And we only lived there between the time I was about 1 year old until I was 18 months old. And being orange trees, presumably that was winter or late winter. So that's my earliest recollection. I don't recollect anything before that. And some of you may have better recollection, but some may have worse recollection. So we can't really use the argument, because I don't remember it, I didn't have a previous life. Because we don't remember it. Now there are people who do remember their previous lives, and they go on the internet or they go and buy books. There are quite some very well studied case studies where people. There was one guy in America, I think his name was, Professor Ian Stevenson. He actually dedicated his research career to that, and so he would go out and whenever he heard a child that had a recollection of past life, would go there and investigate and then try to independently corroborate what that child had said about their recollection of their previous life. So, was this true or not? And so he did find a number of cases, from a scientific point of view, that were very, very solid in terms of the evidence he found. Of course, within Tibetan Buddhism, we have reincarnated lamas, or ones who are called Rinpoches, like the Dalai Lama. So if we look at, say, Lama Zopa, for example, whose picture's behind us, and like the Dalai Lama, I mean, one of my teachers told me a story that what they would do when they'd send out a search party, find the child they believed, or not their local children who might have matched that criteria of being born at the right time in the right place. And they would take objects that belonged to the person in the previous life. And one of the things was that the child had to correctly pick out the objects that belonged to their previous life. And so with the Dalai Lama, there was, I think, some very high abbot and his servants, a few other people went along. And in Tibet in those days, it was sort of fairly hierarchical. So the high lamas or the abbots sort of had very fancy, fine clothes, and the ones who were the attendants had sort of more ordinary clothes. And so the high abbot swapped his clothes with the attendant, but the Dalai Lama ran up to him anyway, and I think jumped in his lap from memory. But also there were a number of items that he was tested with, and one was a group of walking sticks. And what he did, there was one walking stick he picked up, and then he put it down again. And the people in the party knew that the walking stick belonged to the abbot, and they thought, he's made a mistake here. But what happens when they checked later, that walking stick had been given as a present to that abbot by the previous Dalai Lama. So there are quite a few stories like that. If we look in terms of the high lamas, in terms of ordinary children, there are some children that do have a recollection of their previous life and might talk about for a while, but it tends to happen once you get to 3 or 4 or 5 years old, they forget. So in our case, I'm presuming, I'm speaking for us, at least for myself, I've got absolutely no recollection, even say like when I was 6 months old or when I was born, let alone a previous life. The other thing, if we look in sort of modern science, everything comes from causes. If we look at, for example, if we've got, say, growing plants at home, You get a seed, you plant the seed, that plant grows, it then generates its own seeds, the plant dies, and then the seed that was generated gets planted, and it generates a new plant, etc. So we can see that sort of continuity happening, quite easily with in the plant world or the animal world as well, for example. The living things come from something from before. There's a continuum or a continuity. So things, we have things arising because there's been some sort of seed or cause for that thing to rise. It's not as though we get a nice sort of silverbeet plant just spontaneously arising. It's come from a previous silverbeet plant, for example. So it's a bit the same for ourselves. And also, for example, we've got a body, and clearly the body, our physical body is a combination, started off as when the process of fertilisation occurred, we had a sperm and an egg from our parents combined to form a zygote. That then sort of started, the 2-cell stage, the 4-cell stage, 8-cell stage, etc. And then we had process differentiation. And eventually, that little fetus or embryo got bigger and bigger for a period of about 9 months before it decided, I've had enough in here, let's hop out. And your parents had a baby, which was us or you or whatever at that time. Now also, we have a consciousness, and in Buddhism, we have the body and the mind are seen as different entities. I know in modern science there's quite a degree of argument or debate about what is consciousness. Is conscious? One argument with that consciousness is just the interplay of the electrical activity of the neurons. In other words, the brain cells and the nerve cells. That's all it is. So, of course, if we follow that path or that idea, then consciousness would have developed as the nervous system within our fetus or embryo developed as well. In other words, it would have started somewhere after the time of conception. From the Buddhist point of view, the consciousness conception technically is at the time when the consciousness enters the embryo, which will obviously be very early on. Now the consciousness has come from somewhere else. And obviously and what we say, that's come from a previous life. In a previous life there was death. Death is defined as the separation of the consciousness from the body. So at the time when the consciousness leaves the body, from a Buddhist point of view, we would say that person is dead. From a medical point of view, we would say that person's dead when there's two things. One, there's the breathing stopped, but also when the brain activity ceases, there's no more identifiable brain activity occurring. Now again, if you look at very high lamas, there's something called tukdam, and that's a process where very high lamas are able to, the consciousness absorbs to the heart, into what's called the clear light consciousness. So it's very, very subtle level of consciousness at that time. And at the time of death they can stop, the breath will stop just like us, but their consciousness can stay at their heart, inside the heart chakra, for a period of hours or days or weeks, where they're in what's called clear light meditation. And when that happens, the body doesn't decay. It stays normal. But at a certain time, when the consciousness does leave, then the body will start to decay like as a normal body. And so that's something, and again, there are accounts. I mean, I know people who've been to see lamas who have been in meditation at the time they've died and done that for a number of days or weeks before their consciousness has left the body, in terms of that. So in Buddhism we're saying that the consciousness of the body is something separate. In terms of birth or conception, their consciousness enters the physical form. At the time of death, the consciousness is separating from or leaving the physical form, is what's happening. And if our meditation were good enough, we could actually trace our consciousness moment by moment by moment to the beginning of this life, then to the time when we've entered this form, then from the time we were in what was called the in-between state, or in Tibetan they use the word bardo, and some of you would have heard what's called the Tibetan Book of the Dead, or Bardo Thadol, which talks about that process to some extent. And then of course we could trace your consciousness back from the bardo in-between state to the separation of the previous life, then go through the previous life, etc. And so what we're looking at here is there is a continuity of consciousness, and each moment of consciousness is preceded by a previous moment, preceded by a previous moment, and that is never ending. There's no beginning to it, and there's no end to it. So we talk about beginningless time and beginningless rebirth. Now that means if we've had beginningless rebirth, we've had beginningless bodies of different sorts. We haven't always been humans. And whenever we've had a rebirth, we've had a mother. And they would say, the scriptures say, because we've had infinite lives, there are infinite beings, we've had infinite mothers, and every single being has been our mother infinite times. So that's some fairly big numbers for us to deal with. So so this is the sort of logic that's used to try, for us to try and develop a recognition that when let's say like I'm in a room here, or I'm in a group of people somewhere, I'm looking around, I'm thinking, have you been my mother? Or have you been my mother? Or have you been my mother in past lives? And of course we could say, challenge it the other way around, say, you've never been my mother in a past life. Is it possible you've never been my mother? But if we're using infinite lives, infinite sentient beings, and infinite rebirths, then the maths of that says that each individual has been our mother infinite times. So that's a huge challenge. That's a really, really huge challenge for us. And the scriptures or the texts definitely say that's a very hard realisation to generate. But it is worthwhile for us. What we're trying to do is, remember before the equanimity was our starting point, and with the equanimity the starting point was trying to equalise, reduce the sense of attachment or aversion we have towards others. Now what we're trying to do is to cast our mind in a frame that we're looking at other beings from the point of view of seeing them in a positive light. And for most cultures, and even our modern society, mostly people have respect or recognition of the kindness of the mother, or seeing mothers in a positive light. And so this is what we're trying to do, is to get our mind, train our mind to see others in a more positive light than what we currently see them. And if we see them in a more positive light, then that gives us potentially develop much more love and compassion, to reduce our selfishness, and to start to be more open to helping others. So this is where this sort of thought process is taking us. So from that point of view, it's very worthwhile trying to engage in that thought process, although it is challenging, to try and make some headway in terms of being able to see others in a more positive light. So if we follow the assumption that every single living being has been our mother many, many, many times, then our next step is to look, okay, how was my mother, to try and recognise, recall the kindness of our current life mother to us. So first of all, when we were in their womb, they've looked after us, right? They've tried, they don't go around, you've got a baby in here. It's something that's precious. Most times, I think most cases, most women have a great joy they've got a baby. Sometimes it's unwanted, so there's a challenge there. But even in that situation, they're still trying to look after that baby, so it doesn't get bumped, doesn't get hurt, all those things. And then as it gets closer and closer time of the birth of the baby, then they're preparing, getting everything ready so they can look after that baby as well as possible. At the time of birth, many women undergo a huge amount of pain to give birth to that child. And certainly if we go back 150, 200 years ago, there was a significant mortality rate amongst young women giving birth. I remember being in Hobart one time, somewhere near the centre of Hobart, and they had a wall with old headstones that had been placed into that. And many of them were women in their 20s. A lot of them were women in their 20s. And to me, I thought, this is childbirth. They die as a result of childbirth. So it was very risky. Childbirth in those days. And obviously even in this day with modern technology, it still can be very, very painful to give, birth. You've got a labour that goes for 20 hours or more. That's as a bloke I can't comprehend it. And I've never had a kidney stone, so I've never had it, which I'm told is equally as painful or more. But it's incomprehensible. I know any time I've talked about women that say, look, they'll talk, I was pain, but they forget about it. And so because they've got this baby instead, the pain's forgotten about it. even though they have gone through enormous pain to give that child. Now, once they've got that baby is treated as the most precious thing they've got and is looked after day and night. That baby is fed, its bottom is cleaned, it's burped, its nappies are changed. The mother makes sure that child is warm when it's cold, they make sure the baby's cool when it's hot. If the baby starts crying, they're not going to ignore that baby, they're going to jump up straight away and try to help that baby. And they're on, as a mother, they're on duty all the time. And even if you're away, the mind is still switched on, worried about that baby, and checking, thinking, is my baby or child okay? So our mother has looked after us that. Now, I do know that some people in our culture have a problematic relationship with their mother. But I think one of the things to keep in mind that all people, whether it's ourselves or our parents or whatever, are normal human beings trying to do their best with the skill set they've got. So for some people where the relationship might have been challenging, perhaps we still have to remember that person, that mother, was still trying to do their best within the limitations they had. The limitations might have been sort of mental health issues or poverty issues or abusive relationship issues, and there's a whole range of possibilities there that do come into play. But even with all that, usually that person is trying to do their best to look after their child as much as they can. We find that the mother will make a lot of sacrifices for their child. So obviously when they're very young, they sacrifice sleep. They can't go and hang out with their friends as much as they used to. Go off to do their sport every weekend or whatever it is. Many women will give up their job for a while to look after their child, or they put their career to one side. All those sorts of things. So there's a lot of sacrifices being made on our behalf from our mother. And I know in my case, for example, my mother had she lived in a foreign country. She was a migrant to Australia. And my father was killed when I was 4 years old, so here she was in a foreign country, 3 children, 4 and under to look after. And she looked after us, even though it was extremely, extremely difficult for her. She kept looking after us. Then later on, because we lived in a small country town, the educational opportunities weren't that good, she sent us to boarding school. So she was only seeing us for short periods of time, 3 times a year in those days. So I can look back, that's a huge sacrifice, because I wouldn't, the idea of being separated from my kids for those periods of time, I would find really, really difficult. But on reflection, what I can see, looking back, is she's deliberately made a choice in terms of her own happiness, but she would have loved to have had her kids be around. But she saw it as something being better for her own children, to make that sacrifice. And if we look very carefully, investigate, and start sort of thinking about how our parents have our mother in particular has looked after us, we can see there's been a lot of hardship for her, and she's made a lot of sacrifices and done enormous amounts for us. Especially when we were very, very young. But even as we got older, and even, like who else in the world would cook for you 3 times, provide your meals for you 3 times a day? Do your washing, do your ironing, all that sort of stuff. It's your mother, primarily your mother, who does that, or did do that for you. And even if you're 50 years old or 60 years old and your mother's still alive, she's still going to be thinking about your welfare and worried about you. That sort of feeling of love, compassion and concern for you is still there, regardless. So what we're trying to do is, as much as possible, is to recollect the kindness and the sacrifice and the difficulties that our mother's gone through in order to look after us as babies and raise us to become hopefully sort of semi-competent adults. And even as adults, we're still being looked after. Like if your mother's nearby, you've got children, your mother will come and look after your children. If you need a dog or a cat sort of babysat, they'll look after your dog or cat for you, collect your mail. But there are a whole range of things that your mother will still do for you, as long as they're physically able to do that. So, we really try as much as possible to recollect the kindness of our mother from this life. Now, Once we've recollected the kindness of our own mother, we then say, okay, well, my father, when he was my mother in a past life, also showed me similar kindness. And then we can extend it to our friends when they were our mothers in previous lives. Many, many times he showed us that kindness. And then eventually we say our enemy, the person we have trouble with now, also in previous lives as well, when they were our mother, showed us that level of kindness and dedication. And then, of course, strangers. And then we expand it finally out to strangers. Now, for me, because I'm obviously I don't remember much when I was very young. What I find, if I'm often around, you see places, whether it's here or around schools or the streets or wherever, you'll see parents with their kids, young kids, and you watch the mothers. You can see that they're looking after their children very carefully. They're keeping an eye on them, making sure they're safe, protecting them where they need protection, giving them food, taking them to the toilet, all those sorts of things. They're looking after the individual, all the needs of that child as they arise. So one way to think is, okay, when that person was my mother, just like they're looking after their children now, that's how they looked after me when I was their child. And that's quite a helpful sort of way of thinking as well, to try and recognise the kindness of others when they've been our mothers. And so there's quite a bit of thought there for us, but slowly we're trying to expand our mind to view that we recognise that all living beings have been our mothers infinite times in past lives, and in the same way that my mother of this life has looked after me so much and shown me so much love and care and taken care of me in so many different ways, every other previous life as well, those individuals who are my mothers have looked after me in a similar manner. So there's a lot for us there to think, and I know in Western culture there are some people who do have a problematic relationship with their mother, but I've still put out that challenge. If we look at it from the point of view that even done the basic things of physically looking after us, and also usually trying to show us some sort of love as well, if we take the time, we'll recognise that actually they, in most cases, actually have done that for us as well. Although we might have, for whatever reason, might have been some sort of conflict or negative interactions occurred in the intervening years, which colours our view of our mother and then makes it harder for us to actually recognise this person was very kind to us. The mere fact we have a human body and we can be here tonight is due to the kindness of our mother, right? Without our mother, we would not have this human body or the opportunity to be here tonight to spend our time, trying to learn, investigate and think about love and compassion, for example, which is a source of happiness for us. So that's come from that opportunity and kindness has come from our mother, and wouldn't have occurred without what she's done for us. So that's one way of recognising the kindness of others. But But it is a limitation from the point of view we're only looking at sentient beings, their kindness when they were mothers to us. So what about all the other times when they weren't mothers to us? And so this form of kindness looks differently. So, for example, if we look at where all the things in our life come from, things like our food, we're dependent on others for the food that we have. The job we have, we're dependent on others. If we look at the house we have, the car we have, the clothes we have, all these things have come to us in dependence on others. And without others, without depending on those other people, we wouldn't have these things. Especially look at something like our clothing. In all likelihood, that was made in a sweatshop somewhere in Asia. Someone's worked for low pay under fairly poor conditions, long hours, in order for us to have cheap clothes. And almost in our society, almost disposable clothes to a large extent. Things like our computers, our mobile phone, all those things have come that way as well. If we look at even the food we've had farmers who have undergone a lot of hardships. Sometimes they've got droughts, floods, fires. There's a lot of emotional stress for farmers producing our food. And it can be a fairly hard life for them. Also, if you're ploughing up the ground, etc., you're either using chemicals which are harmful, or you're killing a lot of sort of little insects, etc. In other words, there's a lot of harm happening to other beings in order for us the food be grown, then the food, once it's grown, there's a whole supply chain there, which eventually ends up in supermarkets. And so we're dependent on all those processes for our basic necessities of life. So from one point of view, that's a kindness from others, because without that, we couldn't survive. For us to experience happiness, we rely on others. And we do rely, obviously, on our own mental outlook, but we also depend on others as well. And so within Buddhism, we talk about the 10 virtues and the 10 non-virtues. And we say the 10 virtues are the cause for us to experience happiness and have good rebirth. So the first virtue is not killing. In order to not kill, you need other people around that you're not killing. We depend, if there's no one around, you can't observe the morality of not killing, because there's no one to kill. So you actually need people, I shouldn't say potential targets, sounds a bit silly, but we need other people around so we can practice not killing. Stealing the same, not stealing. We need other people around. Sexual misconduct, same thing. Telling lies, the same thing. Harsh speech, the same thing. Slander or divisive speech, gossip, ill will towards others, covetousness towards others, wrong views. All those things require other people. We depend on other people to practice these virtues by, or giving up the 10 non-virtues, and practice the opposite, which is to try and protect others' lives, be generous to others, truthful speech, have patience. All those things, all those qualities you want to develop, we actually depend on the presence of other people. And if you want to develop really good love and compassion and patience, you also need difficult people who challenge you. That's harder. That's a lot harder. And that comes under the category of what I call the thought transformation teachings. In other words, dealing with difficult people and difficult circumstances and turning that from being something different into something positive. So if you really want to see if you're a good meditator, you've got a good calm mind under difficult circumstances, you need people who make your life difficult. And without them, and what's happening? They've got a disturbed state of mind. So there's no benefit for them. But if when you interact with that person in a positive, you show patience, maybe love and compassion, that's an indication that you've developed your qualities to a certain extent. And without that person, you won't know you've done that. You haven't been challenged or tested, etc. So that's another aspect of way where individuals are kind to us, and that includes all beings. Okay, I've probably talked a fair bit. We should do a little bit of meditation. So if you need to stretch or wriggle, have a wriggle or a stretch. And then once you're seated, the main thing would be just have a nice straight back. And just head tilted forward slightly, eyes almost closed but not completely closed. Right hand top of the left hand with the thumbs touching. And then just to stable our mind a little bit, we'll just do a number of sort of slightly longish breaths. And we'll just sort of focus on counting our breath in and out about 7 times should do us. So let's breathe in and then breathe out. Breathe in, breathe out, and then breathe in and breathe out. And when we breathe in all the way to the tummy and then back out. And we're not trying to force or regulate, we're just being natural with it. But at the same time, just sort of allowing ourselves to ground and let go of any tension or busyness that might be within our body or our mind. So just allow yourself to settle a little bit. So what we're going to do now is to just to go back through our life, starting from the present time if our mother's still alive, and to try and recollect the different moments of kindness and love and care that our mother has given us as far back as you can go. So whether it's an adult or a teenager or a primary school kid or even before primary school, all the way back to being a baby, see how much you can recollect of the kindness your mother has shown you. So now we need to think that just as my mother has been incredibly kind to me this lifetime, when she's been my mother in other lifetimes, she's showing me similar kindness. Then we extend this idea that our Father of this life, in previous lives, has on infinite occasions been my mother, and each of those times as my mother, he or she has also shown me unbelievable kindness and love and warmth and care. Then in a similar way, my friends have looked after me as well. And then even my enemies in previous lifetimes when they've been my mother have looked after me with great warmth and compassion and love. And then all sentient beings in previous lives when they've been my mother on infinite occasions have also shown me a similar level of love and compassion and warmth as equal to what my mother of this life has shown me. So at this stage we'll close our meditation. So the next step in this meditation would normally be, we've run out of time for it of course, will be then to sort of generate the thought wishing to repay the kindness of our mothers. And then from there we look into generating love and compassion. Okay, any questions or comments? Yeah. Look, okay, so what's being said is if you've got a problematic relationship with mothers, let's flip it and say, see it in a different way and also to understand how the upbringing of their mother. And that's part of the reason I said that each person, woman as a mother, they're trying to do their best, given the circumstances, their own life and their own mental space, etc. But for most people, the greatest amount of kindness we receive is from our mother, and just the fact that we're physically here alive today is dependent on our mother, because we could have been. Your mother had the choice to abort you, for example, and that didn't happen. And there are plenty of women who, for various circumstances or difficulties in life, do go through having a termination of a pregnancy. And obviously the mere fact that we're here today means that hasn't happened to us. And the most precious thing we have in our life is our body, our life. And so it is a challenge if you've got a problematic relationship, but all the same, we were still fed, our backside was still clean, all those things, which no one else, in most cases, no one else has done for us. So there are some challenges there to work through in terms of how we approach that, and for some individuals it can be can be different how to approach that. I'm just a bloke, I don't know much. Any other questions? You lot are too quiet. I mean, you were meant to have been challenged tonight and being indignant and saying, no, I disagree. Well, I suppose I can throw it back at you. Does anyone want to share the impact that meditation had on them tonight? Just doing that recollection, did that have an impact? Or bring anything up for you? Very quiet. Any other general questions? It doesn't have to be on tonight's topic. Oh, looks like you've run out of steam. Anyway, there was something I missed at the beginning. So what I was going to talk about was, I know during this week, just at one stage I was thinking, because this opportunity for us where we've all come together to sort of think about developing compassion in our hearts, it's actually something incredibly precious. Yeah, something really, really special. Yeah, because that's what we were talking about last week. We were talking about how compassion, the more open we are to others, more compassion and love we have in our hearts, the happier our life is. There's less unhappiness for us. The mind's more open, it's more flexible, it's more free. We feel more joy. It's and we look at the people we want to be around. It's the people who are open, have compassion and warmth and love for others. So for us to have made the effort to come here, say last week and today, is something really precious. Yeah, because there's a whole range of things that we could have done today, like whether it's watching Four Corners on ABC or a football show or something like that, or hanging out with our friends or something like that. Yeah, those things will give us some temporary pleasure, perhaps, or distract us from something else that's going in our life. But those things, by and large, only have an impact for a very short time. Whereas when we, thinking about and trying to develop love and compassion, that's something that has an impact on our own life, and in a positive way, and it has an impact on the lives of people who we're close to, or who we, in terms of our family life, or who we work with as well. And also, of course, if we believe in karma and future lives, it has an amazing impact on our future lives as well. And I was thinking, for example, if we gave each one of you a choice, say, look, do you want to come and sort of spend an hour of your life thinking about and talking, the idea of developing love and compassion, how to do that? Or, you can go to this place over here and we'll put $1 million in your bank account. Which one would be more precious and more valuable for you? And the bank account's only going to last this life at the best, whereas what we've come together today to do has an impact which is far, far greater than that, and sort of can give us far more peace, joy and happiness within our lives, and also the lives of people around us as well. So that's from that point of view, I think that's really special. Yeah, because we do live in a world, for example, where we can see people consumed by hatred and anger, and especially look at what's happening in the Middle East, for example, or Ukraine, Russia, for example, all those places where there are wars, it's the opposite sort of mind that's running riot at the moment. They're consumed, so much anger, so much hatred. There's no love or compassion. There's objectification of the person who's labelled enemy, for example. And once we've objectified them and depersonalised them, then we go out and we hate them even more and try and kill them or harm them, things like that. And that it means we become closed and cold inside in order to do that, which is a really, really sad thing. And the impact on the rest of the life, future lives, is really tragic. That having that sort of state of mind and sort of perpetuating that sort of state of mind. Whereas here, for example, in today's environment, we're actually trying to do the exact opposite of that and change the impact for ourselves. And of course, the impact that we have on the people around us as well, and hopefully that sort of also can spread out as well. And when we look at next week and the week after, we've done our equanimity meditation. We've done recognising all sentient beings as being our mother, infinite times, and we then said, okay, let's look at their kindness from the point of view of being our mother. Let's look at their kindness from the point of view of how we benefit from others, how all our happiness, well-being comes from others. Then in terms of the 11-step process, we'll go back into another equanimity meditation, which is recognising that myself and others all equally want happiness and don't want unhappiness. And then we've also, should say, we've got the repaying the kindness as well. Then also we're looking at a practice called giving and taking, which in Tibetan is called Tonglen. And we'll save that for either... Oh, actually, no, I missed one. We've got looking at the disadvantages of self-cherishing, the advantages of cherishing others, which then leads into Tonglen, or giving and taking. And this is where we mentally take on the sufferings of others and give over our happiness, well-being to others on a mental level. And then developing what's called the extraordinary attitude, the intention, I need to do something more than just imagine this. I actually need to physically get out there and develop myself. So you make the decision, well, and the best way I can do this is become a fully enlightened being. In other words, a being who has removed all their faults and developed all their qualities. So that's sort of the broad steps of where we've headed. So it's all pretty special. Anyway, I should shut up. I'll have to give you an early mark if there's no more questions.
I have a question.
Oh, yes.
When we observe this marvelous knowledge system with all proof that about continuity of the mind and proof, the logic proof that all sentient beings must, that they definitely being our mothers, etc. In theory, it looks marvelous and gives a lot of opportunities to practice, etc. But during those moments that you mentioned, when you see unbelievable cruelty of people who torture each other, who goes to schools and shoot children, etc., during these moments when you observe the cruelty, it's very difficult to control the attitude and to think, oh, from Bodhisattva's way of how Bodhisattva would observe the situation. Yeah, they would generate much more compassion to the aggressor because they see the consequences of their actions, etc. Because the karma of victim just stopped, but the aggressor just started horrible future. But I don't have this, liberated mind, etc. And in the moment when I see this, the cruelty that I cannot understand at all, even in theory. Okay, there can be some spirits involved, there can be some mental issues involved, definitely, because happy mind cannot, torture and kill others. Okay, in theory I understand all these things, but I still don't understand how to put this theory into practice during this particular moment when you learn something horrible sure that it could be avoided, but it still happens. And it's very difficult to think during those moments that all, and these terrorists, and these psychopaths, and this killer, and this, and this, and this, and this, such a being was my mother, and I must generate compassion. I don't know how to do this.
Okay, so the comment or question is on the line of, if we see people doing really, really harmful, cruel things, this is very, very hard for us to develop compassion how we do it. We're beginners, so we've got to do our best. I can think of one story, a monk, when he escaped from Tibet, went to see his Holiness Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama asked him, "What were you most frightened of?" And his response was, "Losing my compassion." That was the thing that he was most frightened of. I thought, yeah, but this person was a great meditator. How do we deal with seeing difficult things? It's very hard for us because we haven't developed very well, but we do have to start with where we're at. And as you say, we've got these thinking processes or analytical processes that we can use. And it's interesting because as you were talking, I was thinking, one thing that came to my mind is that what we've been doing tonight is looking at sentient beings, trying to view them in a positive light. But for example, one could flip and say, every single one of those beings has killed me in the past, has been utterly cruel to me in the past. But we don't do that because we're trying to train our mind to see everyone in a positive light. And it's a matter of training our mind, and also you've alluded to the fact there's karma involved, and as someone who's a bodhisattva, in other words, a great meditator, a great being, has a lot more insight. They've got more insight into karma, they've got more insight into the nature, reality of their own mind, and insight into beings. And also, of course, it's interesting, like normally if we have someone who has a really hard go at us one way or the other, it's very hard for us not to be reactive because we get caught up and we want to explode back at them or say something back at them. But if we've developed our compassion to a greater extent, what might be in their mind is, this person's mind is really disturbed. They're creating terrible karma and suffering for themselves. Yeah, it's possible some people would have that thought, for example. And you can probably see, when we talk about mothers with their children, when your child has a tantrum or gets abusive towards you, you understand that your child is under the influence of anger, and that will pass, and you don't buy into it. I mean, you might be hurt by it, but not as much as it being just, say, your friend next door or something like that. Because you understand your child sort of is tired or they're under influence, so they're behaving in a way they normally don't behave. So with a person who's a great meditator, they understand that every single being's got Buddha nature, or that seed of compassion, love and wisdom inside themselves. But at the moment their mind is completely and utterly obscured by the delusions that are running riot in their mind, such as the anger, and that's driving the behaviour that they have. And so if we've got that sort of understanding, that will then influence how we react to that person and how we see them. We've got a better chance to see that person with compassion rather than we're reciprocating their anger or seeing them as an enemy and someone that needs to be harmed or punished or hurt in some way or other. Because that's of no benefit to us and no benefit to them. And ultimately we're trying to protect our own mind and develop our own mental qualities. So sometimes we do need to be skillful in terms of situations we put ourselves in. So we're not put in a situation where we're overwhelmed by that. But other times, if we look at stories of people who go into war zones to help out, we do read stories of people who sort of step up, so to speak, and end up doing amazing things that they thought they couldn't do. So we sort of do have enormous capacity, to do amazing things. But as you're right, it is also very, very difficult as well, and that's just part of the practice of training. And these meditations we've been talking about, they need to be done on a very daily, or as much as possible. So over a long period of time, we gradually train our mind and become better and better at doing that. And it's no different to football players sort of training every day to become better and better at their footy. Now the only thing, of course, is their bodies get old and they eventually lose their reflexes and their skill, but with meditation we can get better and better as we get older. And if you look at Geshe-Doga's 90 years old, and although he's got an old body, inside as a meditator, he's got extraordinary qualities and he can do things that, or in terms of his meditation, that ordinary people can't do. But we can sort of get some inkling up to the sort of qualities that he has, the warmth and the love and compassion he exudes, the brightness of his aura, so to speak, and his insight when he's talking, just the level of insight he gives as well, You get some sort of sense of what sort of qualities that he might have. And that's sort of obviously, so he's very good for us to use as an inspiration of what over time we can potentially achieve. But the main thing is one foot in front of the other every day, just keep at it and we'll slowly get there. But we've been around since beginningless time, so it might take more than a year or two to get there. Okay, any other comments? Okay, now we have gone over time. If you want, there's a cup of tea out there, there's the bookshops open again, but before we let anyone go, let's just sort of focus our minds just for a moment. And what we've got to do is take great joy in being here tonight and being involved in contemplating and challenging mind about how to develop love and compassion, and particularly in terms of tonight, in terms of developing equanimity and recognising the kindness of others with the intention that we're able to repay that, and for us to become a kinder, warmer person and ultimately become someone who's got the skills to benefit and guide every single living being to a state of perfect happiness. Okay, thank you everyone for your attention tonight and coming, and hopefully it's been worthwhile for you. And there's 2 more weeks of me, then you'll get someone different after that. Okay, so thanks everyone.